was going to say good evening, but some of you might not be watching this in the evening. So, good afternoon, good morning, whatever time of the day you happen to be catching up with the webinar. Welcome to another SLG webinar to support our professional registration candidates. This one is going to be on the third criteria. I'm not going to introduce me because my details are on the screen, and most of you probably know who I am. Now, I know I'm a mentor, and I know from experience that the third criteria, the wider profession, is one that many people struggle with. We live within a nice little school bubble. So all our CPD and our reading, etc., quite naturally, obviously, focuses in on our own development and our services. But for a successful commission, you need to meet all three criteria. Now, this is where I think, let's hope I'm going to, oh, good, it works. I'm never sure until I click the mouse if it's going to move on or not. So this is the criteria taken from the handbook. I'm not going to read them all out because you should have access to these via the Select website. But you will see that I'm going to focus on certification, mainly chartership actually, but the criteria is more or less the same, because you will see both of them say you need to enhance your knowledge of one is information services, the other is the wider professional context of your work, and reflect on areas of current interest. And that's important. In the handbook, the reflect is in bold like that, and I've copied it exactly. But you'll see from fellowship, I don't know if anyone on here is doing fellowship, but it's a much different third criteria. It's much longer term, and you have to show that you've made a significant contribution. But we'll forget about that for this webinar because, as I say, I am going to be concentrating on chartership. What I will say though is a lot of what I'm going to talk about is relevant if you're doing certification as well, because you still need to fulfill that third criteria for certification. Now, the wider professional context actually means looking beyond those day-to-day tasks and your workplace and understanding the environment in which you, as a library professional, operate. And it's not you as a school librarian, because that's within your school and your school library. It's a professional, a library professional within that wider environment. Now, if you were to look at the wider education environment, that includes national policies, education initiatives, professional standards, legislation, all sorts of things. But for criteria 3, you need to go beyond that. You know, a lot of people think that the wider professional context is just outside the school with wider educational factors, and it isn't. It's actually completely outside the school sector. Okay. Also, it isn't just a matter of increasing your knowledge. Um, the assessors want to read about your thoughts and opinions. So you need to do reflective writing on this. You need to think about the issues and challenges of the sector you're investigating and what their concerns are. So, as I say, outside the school. So even though you may be a solo librarian, and most of us are, you don't actually work in isolation, because school libraries fit into a national and global information landscape. And your engagement with this information landscape shapes issues that affect the profession. There's a synergy involved. We're all sort of linked through the profession. If you look at how we link with public libraries and then with academic libraries, with our students moving on, you can see how that link works. And those two are outside the school sector, even though there is an overlap in their use and how we support each other. The other aspect is that there are societal responsibilities shared by all information professionals, not just those in schools. An example of this is digital literacy to counteract the spread of misinformation and disinformation. We know work's going on in public libraries about this. We know work's going on in academic libraries and further afield, and obviously in school libraries. So, when you think about what you need to explore, it's not just about what affects your position in your library, because this limits your perspective. you need to demonstrate a breadth of knowledge, and for that, you need a deeper understanding. So you need to recognise that your practice, your school library, is part of that larger landscape, and how developments and standards and debates in the wider sector can influence and inform and strengthen your work back in the school. The other aspect as well is, but by demonstrating, you are informed by external professional research and national trends and sector-wide challenges. You are basically situating your work within the broader context of the profession. And that's what we should all be doing, really. We should be looking at impacts that are affecting the wider profession and how these are going to impact our schools, and our school sectors. And sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. Nobody really knows, do they? So what sectors can you choose? Now, this is where people do struggle, and you can choose anything. Okay, and I think this might be is a problem when you can choose anything you want. It's like having a huge dessert trolley. You can choose any dessert you want, and you don't know what to choose because there's too much choice. And it's the same with what sectors do you choose. So I always think, well, do you have a personal interest in a particular sector? Are you considering possibly changing sectors in the future? Maybe you want to move into higher education. You actually have 23 SIGs to choose from. I think it's 23. So browse the select website, look at their pages, and does something intrigue you amongst that? Um, I've had previous mentees that have looked at health libraries, archives. In fact, one was interested in local history and investigated archives and arranged a visit to an archive and enjoyed it so much that she ended up volunteering at them. They've looked at academic libraries, public libraries, prison libraries. There's a lot to choose from. Okay, um, so you may usually what people do is explore one sector in depth. Okay, I'm going to give you some ideas of how to do that, but also maybe how you can have a slightly different approach if you want to. Um, so look at the sector, choose your sector, and then have a look at that sector. And as I said, the other aspect you could do is you look across several sectors, but on one topic. Okay. So, how do you start? Having decided you're going to do academic libraries or prison libraries, how do you start with looking at that wider sector? Reading. Start with reading. It's always the easiest aspect, really. And there's a lot available out there. And this is especially useful if you don't get a lot of time away from your school, if you're in an isolated geographical position in the country, and there's not many local libraries around, or you don't have a local prison library. I'm not sure you could visit a prison library actually, but local university library that you might want to visit or something. You may not have the commitment to give that sort of time to it, but most people can do reading. Okay. So have a look through Information Professional. As a member, you'll get that, and it's available online. I think it's going completely digital next year. I remember reading recently. Sign up for SIG newsletters. Whatever sector you've chosen, sign up for those newsletters, but be aware if you do this, the system would deselect you from all the other newsletters you've asked for. So make sure you retick basically all those you're interested in. So if you get School Libraries Group newsletter and you tick that you want the Academic Libraries newsletter, retick the School Libraries Group newsletter, please, because you won't get it anymore. There are other newsletters from relevant organisations that send them out regularly. Sometimes they're monthly, sometimes it's every term. Facet do blogs. I've only discovered this recently because they asked me to write one. But Facet have a range of blogs. They're usually linked to people that have written the books, but the books are on all sorts of subjects and cover all sorts of sectors. So these can be quite a useful source of information. IFLA That's another aspect. IFLA reports, and while I'm talking about IFLA, look at the other library associations, because they produce some amazing material, and they have articles, and their members write blogs, and these are usually open access. You don't have to belong to them to read them. So you've got the Canadian Library Association, the American Library Association, Australia, New Zealand, lots out there. Okay, so explore what's available on the websites. Now, published text, you might have problems accessing these because they're not all open access. SLIP do have member access to some of them, but not all. And if you want to read some, it can be expensive. But it is worth checking your public library catalogue as well, because some of the public library systems may give you access to the sort of reports and research articles you want to read about. So, right, what about, right, other CPD ideas? I put one there, so I'm assuming I've got the next slide is number 2. Lots of other things you can do. Okay, SLIP have a lot of cross-sector opportunities. They do collaboration between groups, but if you look online for webinars and things like that, and just talks and panels and things, there's lots and lots of things happening, so make sure you have a look on the SLIP website. SIGs do webinars. We've got a range of them, but the Southwest, I think it's a member network, Southwest Member Network, they do some fantastic webinars around chartership. So if you're not sure about how to write reflectively, and I know there's information on the SLIP website about this, but if you want something in a bit more depth, then do source those. But do have a look at what other SIGs are producing. Podcasts, do a search for podcasts on your sector that you've chosen, on the topic that is covered. You might want to look at public libraries and book challenges within public libraries, or how they what their outreach is to the community. So have a look for podcasts. I'll give you some examples as well. Health, if you're going to health libraries, Health Education England has some CPD resources. If you want to do public libraries, and Libraries Connected has a range of training and webinars. They're not all free, but some are. So source the ones that are free. Okay. You might want to also investigate LinkedIn groups. There's a wide range of groups on LinkedIn. I keep getting emails for the AI group, and I'm sort of not going down that rabbit hole, So there's a lot around about AI at the moment. I think I could spend my entire week reading about AI. But if that's something you're interested in, then there's a LinkedIn group for it. Okay, AI in libraries. TED Talks, that's another thing. If you're not very good at listening to things, or don't want to do a lot of reading, you do TED Talks. I listen to TED. Shouldn't admit this really, but I usually do my knitting while I'm listening to a TED Talk, because I can knit and watch films. So I'm sitting at my computer listening to a TED Talk and doing my knitting. So it's quite nice. And then forums and chats. And again, a whole range of forums and chats on social media. And the other thing is, look for free recordings of conferences. It's surprising how many conferences do put out their recordings free. I know Lilac do some of them, and certainly some of the major conferences, the IFLA conferences and that. So do have a look. Now, right, ideas number 2. So uh, reach out to SIGs. I think I probably said most of this. Reach out to other networks. Right, okay then. So what you do is going to depend on your circumstances, because not everyone can go off and visit another library or go to the archives or whatever. So reach out to the SIGs, reach out to the sector that you've decided you want to investigate wider, and ask if there's somebody who'll be happy to chat to you about the sector for your chartership. If somebody contacted SLG and said, oh, we need to talk to a school librarian, if a prison librarian said, oh, well, I'm doing school librarianship as my wider sector, can I have a chat to a school librarian? There's probably lots of people, even on the committee, that would be happy to have a chat to them. So we'd help them to get that step further forward on their professional registration. And most SIGs will be the same. Okay, some are slower in responding, because I don't think they're quite so active as we are, and they don't look at their emails and things as often. But the majority of them will get back to you, and the majority will be delighted to help you. Okay. I've already mentioned visiting other libraries, but you also might want to, if you've got the opportunity, to possibly shadow a librarian. I think one of my mentees managed to go and shadow somebody at the Bodleian in Oxford. Sounded fascinating. So, but obviously, as a school librarian, if you don't have family commitments and you have the holidays when you don't go into work, then that's an opportunity for you to actually go and shadow somebody in another library. Um, Once you start reading about the sector that you want to explore, you will discover that there are more opportunities available. It's like when you read an article and they put references at the end of the article. There are things that you can explore for further reading. And it's the same with anything really, isn't it? That any topic that you're researching, it will lead to more reading, perhaps podcasts, talks, research, and on and on and on. So at some point you will have to decide this is it. I've got enough evidence for my criteria 3 and stop, sort of thing. Um, Going back, sorry, going back to visits, public library is quite useful to visit. And also universities. I think most universities librarians will be happy to for you to pop in and have a chat with them. So don't forget special libraries as well. I've never been actually, but there's a military library in Aldershot, and I'm fairly certain if I contacted the librarian there, it's not open all the time, but I'm sure if I contacted the librarian there, they'd be delighted to show me around and show me what they had on the shelves and in boxes. I think it's artifacts as well as books and things. But these things don't have to be in person. That is what's really important. So the assessors are not expecting you to go out and shadow people and visit other libraries because we can't all do that. Okay, so email exchanges, online chats, all those sorts of things are useful. What I will say though is think about the questions you want to ask before you do send an email or have a chat, because this will give people time to prepare their answers. Otherwise, you sort of throw them in it a bit. Right. So, what is the aim of you doing this? Okay. The aim is to build, you need to build an understanding of whatever sector you've chosen, their culture and their operations and their priorities and challenges. So that's you looking outside the school sector and thinking about the world in which the other sector operates. Okay, so the wider sector is not organising author visits with other schools. I've had this come up in evidence, and I've had to say no, no, that's still school related, because although you've got authors coming in, yeah, they're coming into the school. It's not collaborating with teachers because that's still within the school and the education sector. It's also not working with groups of other school librarians in other schools. You see what I mean? You've got to go completely outside the school and not think about that. But what you can do, and what they all expect to see, is comparing and contrasting the sector you've chosen with your work. You need to, once you've got the information about your wider sector, you need to start reflecting on it. Are the issues and challenges the same? Are there any practices that you take back to improve your services? Because we all go to other school libraries. We look at school libraries and we, take best practice from school libraries. But there are lots of things going on in other libraries outside the school sector that we can copy. So remember, um, I've lost track of what's. Sorry about this. I'm completely right. So now let's see. I've said that right. The aim. Here we go. Ideas. Public library sector. That's it. The next few slides, I'm going to give you some ideas about what you can do. Now, it will depend on what sector you've chosen and what you want to investigate. So keep in mind you're meant to be writing reflectively about this, and you can be critical. Nobody's going to read your portfolio. Nobody that you've spoken to in the other sector is going to read your portfolio. It's between you and the assessors, and if you choose to share it, your mentor. Okay, so looking at the public library, We have differences in purpose from school libraries to public libraries. You might want to look at the community engagement. How do they engage with their community? Because unlike schools, they don't have a community that's there in the building every day. They have to pull them in. What are local public libraries' response to their user needs and interests? And this will vary from area to area quite strongly, actually. I visit 3 libraries in Hampshire, and I've got one locally where I live, and there's another 2 that are in towns that I go to fairly regularly. All very, very different ethos, and they even have different resources. My local library doesn't have any manga or graphic novels, which I'm really quite surprised about, but the other 2 libraries do. So what programs do they run? And this is the important bit. What challenges and issues are there in that sector? Okay, you might want to think about staffing. What's staffing like in public libraries? And financial authority, who pays? I'm not talking about we know who pays for public libraries. It comes through the local authorities, isn't it? But I'm thinking more about who makes financial decisions about buying books, who chooses which books to go on the shelves, if users ask for request, who authorises those, so whereas, we're used in schools to having autonomy over our budgets, most of us, and I think you'd be quite surprised if you start to investigate other sectors, how many other sectors don't have that sort of autonomy. Um, I mean, one of my mentees who was visiting a health librarian, they went to chat to them, and I was talking to them afterwards, and she said that the health librarian was completely amazed that the school librarian could just go off and buy books, because she said what happens in her system is somebody makes a recommendation, for example, a doctor. They have to then fill in the paperwork and get it authorised to buy that resource for the doctor. So you can imagine how long that can take sometimes, and especially if it's something that the doctor wants fairly quickly. So I think in a way, school librarians are quite lucky in that aspect. And again, I've said, how can you use elements from the public library within your school library? Now, academic libraries, again, they're very different. They have different priorities. They take our students once they've gone from school off into university, but there is an emphasis on digital resources. So what is the difference? You could look at the difference between digital resources in academic libraries and how they're promoted and managed compared with your school library. And is there anything they do that you think that's a good idea? I could bring that back to school. Delivery of information literacy skills. Some school librarians do this, some don't. And also challenges with transition. What sort of challenges do staff have with their students? How do they collaborate with teaching staff? Do they collaborate, or do they just get, because they certainly probably don't get lessons in the library with academic staff bringing groups of students down. So do they collaborate, or do they just get requests from teaching staff to resource, information for them, or documents or something? Again, look at issues specific to the sector and think about the budgets, how they manage their funding and their budgets. And again, what you could think about if you are doing academic libraries is how can you use any of this information to prepare your students for transition. Now, I'm going to do a little plug here because in March, it's Memberfest, it's Salip Memberfest, and SLG are presenting a webinar on transition students from um, further education into higher education. We've got a further education librarian who's delivering the webinar for us, so keep an eye out for that. But if you're watching this after the 5th of March 2026, then it will be available because it will be on our website, so you'll have to check it out on our website. So there are Right, healthcare sector. Now, this is quite interesting. I don't know a huge amount about the healthcare sector, but I've learned quite a lot from my mentees that have investigated this. You tend to get subject specialisation. You also get that actually in academic libraries as well, but you do get subject specialisation, and they provide current awareness services, and they're very heavily, they make heavy use of evidence-based decision making. You could consider again staffing, issues, budgets, and are there any services that you might be useful to introduce into the school library? I'm not sure, do you do current awareness services to your staff? Some of you might do. You might not even think of it as a current awareness service, but it probably is. If you're telling them of the research and reports and the books that you've recently catalogued that are relevant to their subject. The other aspect as well, while I think about it, is professional standards, right? Let's see, right, here we go, other aspects. Professional standards, so are there national guidelines? Right? This is where you might want to look at rather than one sector in depth, you might think, I want to look at a wide range of sectors, but rather than go into each sector in a lot of detail, you might think, right, okay, I'm going to investigate professional standards and I'm going to have a look and see what national guidelines there are for health libraries and academic libraries and public libraries and any other libraries you might want to choose. Prison libraries, are there national guidelines? Do those sectors have codes of practice? How do they vary from each other? What are the qualification requirements? Okay, so, and then you could look at all this and think, how do these compare with the school sector? I mean, we know from experience that there aren't national guidelines for school libraries and there's no qualification requirements. But it'll be interesting to see with the recent developments in putting libraries into primary schools and the National Year of Reading and everything, whether we will start to get some national guidelines as to what actually is a library. But, we'll just have to wait and see. So, how do these guidelines affect the sector under consideration? Do they bring specific challenges and issues? Do they have an impact on people's career progression if you've got to have certain qualifications to move up the hierarchy? There's all sorts of aspects you can consider even if you're just looking at professional standards. And then be reflective and think about what would be the impact of having these professional standards in the school sector. How would introducing professional standards and qualification requirements impact the school sector? You might want to think about how different sectors meet the needs of their service users, because every sector has a complete different group of users. I always think with health librarians, you've got the doctors, obviously, but they do provide, like Health Education England, provide a lot of outward-facing information for patients, for the public. So to me, they've got two huge groups of stakeholders there with the doctors and the medical. Well, it isn't just doctors, actually, isn't it? It's medical staff with medical staff and the patients, and how do they balance these two different sectors' needs? How do demographics vary between the sectors? What are the sector's community priorities? And you could always look at wider stakeholder groups. What stakeholder groups are actually involved in all these sectors? Okay, that's quite an interesting one to explore, because when you start looking at school library stakeholder groups, you realise just how wide the community of a school library is, not just within the building, the immediate, students, staff, parents and carers, and you've then got the governors, but you've got local businesses, you've got local colleges, careers, services. There's all sorts of stakeholders that go, if you like, sort of border around the school library. Now, you may want to investigate operational structures and service models. So that's things like staffing levels and roles and careers and pathways. You might find it difficult to find this information out for some of these sectors, but if you choose to go down that route, think about how they influence the sector and the service models, what services are offered and how they're delivered, and also how successful is their outreach. So how do they measure the impact of these services within the sector? Another area to explore, there's lots actually, I haven't listed them all. When I started thinking about this, I thought there's lots of things you could cover. But again, it depends on what you're particularly interested in. You might be interested in how you meet your user needs and how you could maybe better meet them and learn from other sectors about this. But collection and resource management, okay? The strengths and weaknesses of their resource management. are there any gaps in them? What licensing models are used? Cataloging differences, that's another interesting area. Do their cataloging systems create challenges for their users? So, and tech landscape, if you're interested in technology, think about tech landscape in different sectors, the platforms used, library management systems and how they differ, the advantages and disadvantages of them, what access do users have to tech. I mean, my local library doesn't have a catalogue that I can search in the library anymore. I used to quite like going in and searching on the catalogue, and now I have to search at home before I actually go into the library, which isn't always very successful, to be honest. And again, digital resources is another area. And finally, the last thing here is user experience. So that's sort of things like the design of spaces, accessibility. What are these other sectors' approaches to diversity and inclusion? Okay, because we all, that's quite high priority for our libraries, isn't it? We want to create that nice, safe space that's welcoming and inclusive to our whole community. Do these other sectors do that? And if they do, how do they do that? Okay, could what they do be improved? Maybe they could learn from the school sector, or maybe there's something they do that you think, oh, I'll take that back and give that a go. Okay. So I'm going to do a few writing prompts just to give you some starting points, okay? Because I know what it's like to have a blank piece of paper in front of you, and you sort of think, oh, where do I start? And I will say, if you're not sure, just start writing. That's the easiest thing, because then you've at least got something to work with and something to edit and to move on from. And if you're really not sure, just start writing a few keywords, because that will give you a few ideas of what to explore and what to research. Observations, right? When you're looking into the sector or the aspect you've considered, think about what surprised you about the sector. Okay, what assumptions did you have about that sector were challenged? Because we all have assumptions about different sectors. So did something you thought, oh, I didn't know they did that, and comparisons. What skills are there in common with school librarianship? What pressures and constraints are there? Do they differ from school libraries, and how? What differences are there in collection development and things like that? So whilst I say you need to go outside the wider sector, you do, but then you need to start thinking about, as I say, how this reflects within your sector, your own sector within your school. But what I will say is don't then get bogged down in making lots of information, writing up lots of information about your school library and how it operates. So if you're looking at cataloguing, like you want to know how health libraries catalogue their resources, how academic libraries and etc., you can then say, right, this is how we do it in school libraries, but if you start writing reams and reams and reams about Dewey classification or genreification or whatever system you use, you're moving it back into the school sector again. So you need to, you do need to bring that comparison in, but not in huge amount of detail. Okay. Personal insights, right? What aspects could you adopt or adapt for use in your own service? What did you learn about your values as a librarian? So you then think, oh, I do that with my school students. That's good. So, and how did your research broaden your understanding of the sector and of librarianship as a whole? Future practice, what ideas will you take back? What questions do you still have that are unanswered that you want to explore further within that sector? Now, it's okay when you're writing up your evidence to say that there's this area that you want to explore further. I mean, in archives, you might want to explore more about how they digitize documents or how they preserve, what preservation techniques they use. But and you may not have the time to go into detail, and it may not be relevant to what you're doing at the moment. But you can say, it's okay to say in your portfolio that you found out this, but you've still got unanswered questions, and you will explore this in the future. It's something you want to explore further because you're interested in it, okay? And you can use those questions and the experience to inform your CPD goals. So because this is what the assessors want to see, they don't want to say you to say, right, this is my chartership portfolio. That's it. I've done my chartership. I'm not doing any more CPD. I'm all done. They want to know, how you're going to develop yourself as a professional librarian. What CPD are you going to undertake in the future? What have you learnt from your chartership journey that has made you want to find out more? And how are you going to do this? And the important thing to remember with all of this is reflective writing. You need to reflect on it. It's your personal journey, so it has to be I. It's first person. So, and if you're used to academic writing, it'd be quite difficult to do. But you need to say I. I thought. I felt. You can be critical, as I've said. A critical evaluation. And your personal thoughts and opinions, and these will be different for everyone. Everybody's evidence is going to be completely different. Now, what you do need to do is link the criteria 3 evidence to the PKSB. The sections, it's really difficult. I had a look at the PKSB and I thought this is quite difficult because the sections will actually depend on what you've chosen to explore. But so if you looked at how the sector or sectors manage their collection and what's their collection strategy, then obviously that's 1.1 and 1.2. If you're looking at how they gather information about their users and their demographics and their needs, is 3.2, understanding information seeking behavior. So you need to think about, these are just some examples I put, so you need to think about what aspect you've explored in the wider sector and how that relates back to the PKSB. Okay, I mean basically all sectors engage with stakeholders. So if you're looking at that, then you can. It's 10.4. You're engaging with stakeholders, and again, do the sectors collaborate with external partners, and how do they do this, and what do they do? So partnership development. Right, I've left quite a bit of time because I didn't want to talk for the whole time about wider criteria, and I've left quite a bit of time for questions. So, I think Caroline was checking that I've not been checking anything of chat or anything. I've just been moving on slides. So, while Caroline's checking the chat, there are some questions. I did have a couple sent to me, but also I know what questions come up with my mentees, and often they're the same. Okay, so one of the questions it's the one that everybody raises. They look at the PKSB and they panic, and that's where people stop, right? And I totally understand that. When Silip first produced the PKSB, they sent out hard copy things, really nice coloured glossy leaflet thing. And I took one look at this and shoved it in the file. I thought, what on earth is this? But then I thought, come on, you're a mentor. You've got to get to grips with this and understand this. So I made myself go through it. And the SLG, we're actually working on, it should be published next year. We're working on a PKSB that's relevant to school librarians. The Health Libraries Group have got a fantastic one on the SLIP website. So we're using, the same template, and we're relating the PKSB sections, the different sections, to specific examples in school librarianship. Because I think what the problem with the PKSB is, because it covers all the different types of librarianship and knowledge management, it's the wording's quite generic, and I think sometimes you look at that and you think, I'm sure I don't do that in my school library. When you break it down, a lot of it is really relevant to school librarianship. But you'll be pleased to know, if you haven't done it already, that you don't have to choose all the PKSB sections. You don't have to go through and rate your level on all of them. Okay. To start with, they're not all relevant to school librarians. They're also not all relevant to your current position. Okay, so you need to choose 10 to 12. Okay, and what I suggest to mentees is choose the 10 to 12 sections of the PKSB that will reflect areas that you'll be working on, areas where you'll be undertaking CPD and putting that into practice, because that is what you need to do to show evidence in your portfolio. I mean, it might be that you're desperate to learn about, I don't know, some sort of social media. Say you want to, oh, I'd love to do social media, but if your school doesn't let you use social media to promote the library, then you're not really going to be able to gather much evidence to show the impact it's had. So think about the projects that you're doing, what you're going to be working on, and where you're going to be learning and undertaking CPD, so you can actually gather the evidence. And so it's sort of a backward. I always think it's better off to do the PKSB backwards rather than look at it first. To think about what you're going to include in your portfolio, and then link those projects to the PKSB. Another question that comes up is, and this is usually a bit further down the line, is can I change the PKSB sections if I've already selected them? You'll be pleased to know, yes, you can do whatever you like with the PKSB, because the only time the assessors see it is when you submit it at the end, when you're ready to submit your portfolio. They won't see any changes you've made. Okay, so you might find you've selected, I don't know, most people select more than 10 to 12 to start with, and then you get rid of the ones. Now, that's fine. You will find as you look at your evidence, your projects, they will link to a lot of the PKSB sections. So once you start putting together your portfolio and collecting your evidence, you'll soon know which is your best evidence, which demonstrates those PKSB sections better than other evidence. You know, you might have 3 pieces of evidence that point to one PKSB section. So obviously that's a nice strong PKSB section where you can show CPD and how you've used that to change or improve your library services and the impact of it. You might change it totally. I've had people that have one project they're going to do in school, and they've selected their PKSB sections, and then suddenly the school initiatives change completely. That project's not happening anymore. They've got something new they've got to work on, completely different PKSB sections. Not a problem. Okay. So you can amend it at any time. So obviously you've got your level that you start with, the level you are now. You've got your target level, which is not the 3rd level. And then when you come to submit it, you think about where you've reached. Have you reached your target level? Maybe your starting point was 1 and your target was 3. And I will say here that 4 is your expert level. So you know, then the assessors are not expecting to see 4 at chartership level. Okay, but if you reach a 4, that's fantastic. There's nothing wrong with reaching a 4, but don't feel that's your target you need to aim for, please. So you might decide, right, my target's 3. When you come to submit your evidence, you think, well, I'm not really at 3 yet, I'm only at 2. So that's fine. You're not going to be judged on whether you reach your target levels or not. Okay, the PKSB is a tool for you to manage your CPD, for you to manage your career. Some people use it in an appraisal, although I think, to be honest, if I turned up with a PKSB in my appraisal, my manager would probably look slightly petrified at it. He wouldn't know what was going on. So yeah, what I will say though is, if you're going to fill it in retrospectively, you have to think about the level you were at when you started your chartership, before your CPD, before you improved and increased your knowledge in that area. And this can be quite difficult to do, okay? So, but just bear that in mind. If you do change it part of the way through and you've chosen new areas, what was your level when you started, okay? Another question.
Barbara, we have a
Yes.
couple of questions
Oh,
in the
good.
chat.
Okay,
Yep.
yeah.
And I'll just also say in the chat, you have links to 2 of our upcoming webinars that might help you. One on the one that you mentioned, the MemberFest webinar on preparing your students for university or college. So you can book on that now. That's the 5th of March, but you can book now. and one on our behaviour management topic in January, in case you want to compare how you manage behaviour in a school library with pupils who follow the same rules to a public library when you're dealing with members of public where there aren't any rules.
Yeah.
So that's something you might. However, we have a question here from Nathan. Do we need one project per PKSB section, or might we have, say, 4 projects at work and link them to 10 PKSB sections?
You can have it. You can have one project if it covers your criteria, but you can have several projects. Most of my mentees have several projects. What I will say is, if you're going to use evidence, you have to be very clear if you're going to link it to more than one criteria. So if you use evidence and we want to link it to criteria 1 and criteria 2, you need to do 2 lots of reflective writing for that, because you need to do reflective writing about your CPD and how useful it was and what you did and what you've taken from it. And then you need to do another piece of reflective writing on how you put it into practice and what the impact was and what you do better next time or change next time. So it really is entirely up to you. I think it depends on where you're working in a way. You might only be involved in one large project, or you. And you might have smaller ones on the go, but they don't really aren't really projects where you can gather the evidence to show impact. I think most school librarians probably have lots of different projects on the go. So entirely up to you. I hope that helps answered, but be very clear when you're linking with your criteria that it's if you use the same evidence as 2 criteria, it needs to be really clear which bit of the evidence is relating to what piece of criteria. Right. Okay. Have we got another question? I think Caroline's. I'll go to. Right. Caroline will probably come back with the other questions, but another question that comes up is how many pieces of evidence do I need? Now, the recommendation is, and this is a maximum, is 15 to 25, but think about quality, not quantity. Okay, so think about why are you putting that piece of evidence in your portfolio? What are you showing with that piece of evidence? So, for example, if you've decided you're going to introduce genre categories within your fiction collection and not use the author surname, you may think, oh, I'm going to put lots of photos of shelves of what it looked like before and what it looks like now with all the different labels on. Now, that might look absolutely lovely and your shelves might look beautifully neat and everything, but what the assessors want to know is what was the impact of you doing that? And the photo doesn't really give you that information. It doesn't show any impact at all, other than a visual impact, I guess. So what you need to do there is collect the evidence of perhaps increased borrowing, or maybe students found it easier to find resources. Did they make comments about the new layout and the way you arrange the collection? I'm not saying don't use photos of your nice shelves, but you don't need lots of them. I mean, I've had portfolios where I've got, 4 photos of messy shelves and 4 photos of the nice, neatly labelled shelves. One will do, because you've got a limit as well to the size. I'm not sure if anybody's ever gone over the size limit. I've never had anybody say I can't submit my work, it's too large. But there is a size limit, and obviously the more photos you put in, the more you know data you're going to use. So think about the quality, not quantity. Okay. Is Caroline back yet?
Yes.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
We've got another question.
Yeah. Question from Fiona. I
Right.
did some investigating into a new sector and used it successfully. So I'm just about to change jobs into it. Most of my evidence will relate to my previous sector, but some will be from my new job. Does that mean I can't use my evidence relating to the new sector for
Ah,
my criteria 3? That's
that's
interesting, isn't it?
interesting one. I
I've
don't think
had
I've,
people change schools,
yeah.
and he said, yes, you can use evidence from both schools, but not if you change into your wider criteria sector.
Right. I would think, I'm not sure. I think it depends how far off you are from submitting your portfolio. I mean, if you've still got a fair bit to do and you're planning to use your new job to gather more evidence for your portfolio, then you might need to investigate a different. I can find out for you actually. You might need to investigate a different sector. Um, but if you're fairly close, and you've done that investigation of that sector, I mean, it would be, you basically say, right, I investigated this sector, I found it so interesting that I've changed jobs into it. So it really has had an impact, hasn't it? Um, yeah, that is interesting. I do wonder if you could actually, for criteria three, you've got the sector you've investigated while in one sector. Now you've moved into that sector, so you might need to do another smaller investigation in a different sector and do like the two sectors. I'm going to have to get back to you on that, I think. Okay, so
Barbara, shall I put your email
you
address
can
there?
do, or she's got, oh,
Oh, she's saying thank you, but or email me.
yeah, chair. Was it
Yeah, I'll
chair.slg?
put my email.
Yeah.
I'll put the chair email in, and if you email me, I'll pass it to Barbara.
Yeah,
Okay.
and because they must, I can't believe out of the years they've been doing this and all the people that have got professional registration, they haven't had this issue before.
Yeah, they
Really
must have
fun.
had.
Yeah, I
Well, like
do
I said,
know.
changing school's one thing, but changing into another
Yeah,
sector, I've
yeah.
not.
I do know that I mean, a lot of people do change their jobs when they're in the middle of doing their portfolio. If you do that, then obviously you need to update your CV that you send in to show your new job. They suggest you put both your job descriptions in, and you can have evidence from both jobs, but there is a sort of rough 2-year rule that applies because so it like the evidence to be from within the past couple of years. So it may be difficult to gather evidence from your new job immediately because most jobs take time to get to grips with them and to find how everything works and to start things off. Um, Also, I will say that very often I find that mentees that change jobs often come to a bit of a halt with their chartership because they suddenly get really busy with the new job. Because changing a new job is busy, isn't it? It's not just even if you change schools and you're running a school library that you've been doing the job for years. You've got a whole new staff to get to know, a whole new group of students, a whole new room full of resources, half of which you think are there and not. So, but yeah, it's changing jobs is fine, but sectors, yeah, I will 100% look into that and get back to you. And if you
Yep.
email Caroline, she'll have your details and we can send you the answer. Okay.
And Fiona says thank you, and she's fortunately has been looking into a third sector anyway. But
Ah, okay. But if you've done
so
the work in the one, do you know it? But it would be a real shame though if you couldn't include the fact that you've looked at another sector and what you've discovered has had a real impact on you to change sectors. But then that will come out on your job when you do your CV. It's an annotated CV, so that is one thing to pick up on your CV, isn't it? That this is what happened. So, right, do we have any?
we
Did you
don't
say?
have any others at the moment, but
Right,
please
okay.
carry on putting them there.
Right. So I've mentioned about the 2-year thing. So it's the question I get asked is how old can my evidence be? Now, as I said, select like it to be around 2 years old, which sort of puts a time limit on completing professional registration. I think they've found that a lot of people are signed up for chartership and then nothing happens, and they've got all these people sat there and haven't heard from them. So they do, I think they now send out an email if somebody after 2 years or so to say, how are you doing? I don't know because I'm not involved in that sort of loop. But if yeah, if your evidence is too old, I think they feel, it's like, oh, I did this project 10 years ago and I'm going to include it. Well, that's a little bit too old, even 5 years. It's different for fellowship because they're looking at a longer term aspect there. But it also slightly depends on your evidence. You could be doing a 2-year project, and you might need time, after it's finished to evaluate it and get your data in and your statistics and work out, the impact of them all and everything. So the 2 years not a cut off. So please don't worry. It is definitely not a cut off. Um, and I like to, the way I work as a mentor is that I'm very much a hands-off mentor. I don't pressure people because I know if I was doing this, if I kept getting emails from my mentor, I'd be stressing out. Oh, for goodness sake, I'm really busy, But I also don't like to feel I have abandoned them. This is the thing. And I know that sometimes a little email, say, well, how are you getting on with everything? Can be a gentle prod. So I will do this at the beginning of the year. I will email my mentees just to see how they're doing. And I'll keep in mind the last time I heard from them, and some of them it's longer than others. And I'll just say, how's it all going? Now, some of them will have decided chartership isn't for them. Some of them will maybe change jobs completely, or they've moved to a different sector, or life has got in the way, family circumstances. And I find sometimes that email sort of prompts them to start things up again. What I do, the way I also work is I offer my mentees, most of this is by email, I should say, but I do offer my mentees a Zoom call. Um, and I found that quite useful at the beginning when they're starting their journey, because all these questions they're coming up here, I can address them in the Zoom. Now I've only got a personal Zoom. We're using SLG Zoom here, but I've got personal Zoom, so it limits it to 40 minutes because otherwise we get it. It means we stay on track talking about chartership, because the problem is get a couple of school librarians together and they start talking school libraries and books. We'd be there 3-4 hours later and haven't mentioned chartership at all. But I find, that sort of personal Zoom connection, they can see what I look like. And I can tell when I'm talking to them about how to start their chartership journey. It helps me, understand. I can see whether they've understood the process or not. If I can see them, you can't tell that on a email or even on a webinar like this, because I'm just talking to my screen here. So yeah, there we go. There. The other thing I do get asked is what counts as CPD. And I basically anything, right? They say, oh, what does this count as CPD? People think you have to pay to go on formal courses for it to count as CPD. You don't. I mean, that obviously does count if you're lucky and you've got the funding and there's courses available, formal training counts, but webinars count. Informal in-person school librarian meetings. Quite a few people have local groups of school librarians that get together once a term or once every half term. They count. Academic reading, so talking about research and reports, articles and blogs. Okay, online conversations. It can be on social media, or a specific conversation with one person. Emails, chats to other librarians, visits to other libraries to steal ideas. Everything really counts as CPD. If you're learning something from it, then you're learning, you're improving your expertise, your knowledge, and your skills. Okay. What I would say is keep a journal while you're doing your CPD. Just make a little note, especially if you're doing lots of reading, lots of dipping into webinars, lots of different bits and pieces, because you'll forget what you've done. So just keep a journal, informal. You don't have to. You can use your journal. I've got a mentee at the moment who's journaling her CPD, and she's writing reflectively about it and evaluating it, and she's going to use that or some of the pages from it as part of the evidence for criteria 1. But if that's not your style, you don't have to do that. You can journal and then write up your journal. You can summarize it and write it, up into a summary. So what I will say though, is evaluate your CPD. If you go to a webinar, I don't want to see your evaluations from this one, please. But if you go to a webinar, evaluate afterwards. Just write a couple of sentences about what you learnt from it, what was good, what gaps, what was missing, what would you like to have been covered, because that will also give you pointers to another CPD route, another thing to explore. If there were gaps in the CPD you did, right, okay, the next step is to fill those gaps, isn't it? To find out, where you can get that information from. And also, the other thing with your CPD is reflect on it. How are you going to use this CPD? What is the next step? How are you going to put this into practice? Okay. You might not put everything into practice. You'll read lots of things and it'll be really interesting. And you'll think, well, that's not relevant to my school library. But I'm glad I've read that because it's broadened your perspective. Okay. And another question, and this will be the last one unless we've got more come up, is what does annotated CV mean? Because most of us are used to doing CVs for jobs, don't we? So it's two sides of A4, and you have to be very succinct and concise. But your annotated CV is, they say, I think up to 4 pages you submit on your CV. So it's a time, an opportunity for you to reflect on your career. And you can be critical. You can be critical about the jobs you've had. No one's going to read it. Certainly not your employers, past or present. So you can say why you changed jobs. I mean, normally when we do a CV like that, we say, oh, you took the new position because you wanted something more challenging, or it was an opportunity to move into a managerial position. Well, and sometimes that isn't always the case, is it? So you can actually be honest and reflective and about why you changed jobs, what were the frustrations in the job, were you able to develop your career or gain relevant experience, and if not, then that's why you moved, because there was like a ceiling to what you could do in the job. So as I said, it is definitely not like the CV you submit for an interview. Right, I'll check with Caroline. Have we had any more questions?
We have. I
Oh,
know
good.
you've partly answered this one, but I think you just need a reminder. Someone says, I haven't decided if I want to do chartership yet, but I'm wondering what CPD they are looking for. Are there any specific places apart from CILIP where I can find CPDs that are free, not expensive? And how many do we need to do in order to pass the criteria? I think that also depends. Some of the question will be what sector you're in as
Yeah,
to where you find CPD.
yeah, that's true. I mean, if you have access, I think with these the slides and the recordings coming out in about a week or so, because Gareth,
Yeah.
our web officer, is quite busy next week. We've got a advent calendar, SLG advent calendar going out on social media, and it's the 1st of December on Monday, believe it or not. But yeah, so have a look at when I said start. Reading's a good place to start. Look on the Select website. I don't know what sector you've chosen or what sector you're in, but your CPD is, I mean, I'm guessing you're talking about CPD for the whole portfolio, not just the wider sector. Um, so you need to think about what CPD you need. That's going to determine what you do, isn't it? Um, and do some searching. It is amazing what is out there. There's a huge. If I'm going to assume it's a school librarian, there's a huge number of school librarians that write blogs. A lot of them are American, so they are slightly US biased. So which is a bit frustrating because they mention all these wonderful books sometimes, and we can't get them over here, or not without paying a lot of money. But yeah, but they write about all sorts of different aspects. Genre-refine the collection, creating maker spaces. There's a massive amount available. Um, if you've signed up for SLG newsletter, and if you haven't, why not? I'm the editor, so I do try it comes out every half term, and I try and publish it around the beginning of term. And I usually manage to find lots and lots of CPD opportunities. And these vary from free webinars. There's a lot of free webinars out there. Um, I'm trying to think what was in the last one. I mean, Caroline, if you've got it to hand, I don't want to sort of lose my screens and start looking for it.
Which last
Um,
one? Last
yeah,
one we did.
the last newsletter. I'm trying to think what CP. There was a lot of
Oh,
CPD in it, wasn't there? The OUD free CPD, National Literacy Trust
yeah.
sometimes, public.
Carol Weber's pointed out that the teaching unions provide free CPD,
Yeah,
especially NEU provide they've got very strong librarian sector. So if you're in schools and you want to
Well, you
go
have to be in
into
the
one
union,
on,
I think, don't you? If
yes,
you,
but
yeah, yeah,
if you are in a union, I
NEU,
mean,
yeah,
I only know the NEU one because that was my union, but
yeah,
your union might also
yeah,
provide.
yeah.
Uh,
No, we provide a mix of free webinars and paid for webinars. Our
yeah,
paid for webinars, we always price them low. I think, is it £25 the one on behaviour management?
yeah,
I think,
for
yeah, but
members
for
and
members,
30 for
30,
non-members.
yeah. So, because we're aware, school librarian salaries are not high, not the highest in the profession. But we have to have some paid for because then that funds the other things we do for members. So things like, paying for our digital platforms and things like that. Um, but there is a real huge amount available. I'll tell you what, it's got me thinking that this would be quite a good topic for another webinar, wouldn't it? How to do, where to find CPD for school, for well, not just school librarians. I've made a note of that, so watch this space.
And also, this is the third, if not the fourth, of our free webinars on how to do chartership. So if you haven't headed over to the SLG website, then I would go there because all our other free webinars,
Yeah,
like how to write a reflective statement and things like that, they are all on our
yeah,
website.
yeah.
So I will
But
pop the link in the chat for you
yeah,
if you haven't headed there.
I mean, lots of organisations, things like the Charlie Waller Trust, the free webinars, um, a lot of the mental health organisations have not just webinars, but they have reports, they have articles. It depends on what your focus is. You could spend your entire life reading about all the, because school libraries do so much, don't we? As school librarians, we cover a huge range of things. We've got all the reading, supporting learning to read, the reading for pleasure, the reading for information and the information literacy skills, of digital media skills, and then the well-being aspect and supporting the curriculum and the teaching and learning. There's such a huge amount that a school librarian does that you can't include everything. You have to be selective as to your CPD because otherwise you just spend your whole life doing CPD and no school librarianship. But so think about your project, think about what you're going to include in your portfolio, and you need to make sure. I say this to my mentees: make sure you choose something you can collect the evidence of impact for, because that is really important. That is the most important aspect of your portfolio, showing your impact. You have to reflect on what you've done and the impact it has had, and then critically evaluate it. Basically what went well, even better if, which is what we tell students. And that is what the assessors are looking for, that impact you've had as a professional librarian. How have you developed your skills? How have you put that in that new skills you've learned into practice, and what the impact has been? So think about the areas you're working in and where you're going to be doing that, and then think about what CPD will support you in those areas. But
We
yeah,
have
it's
Gareth, our web officer, has just put a lot of links to our free
brilliant.
past webinars in the
Excellent.
chat. We will put it in the um, when we send you out the link to the free webinar, but also our Open University training course for
Yeah,
new school librarians, which is
yeah,
completely free.
yeah.
So
That's free as well. So
and then we did a training course recently on relationships and sex education in schools. So if that's something you want to look into, um,
yeah,
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 we have quite a few free, and we've got also good book recommendations. So if you're not sure where to start with professional reading, we have book recommendations on our website as well.
yeah.
So our website's got a lot of free information that may be really helpful to you.
Yeah, yeah. And the other thing is, I mean, it's just reminds me of Caroline talking about our OU course. It's a OU BOC, which is a badged open course, BOC. You investigate places like Future Learn because they do free courses, and also and look for MOOCs, MOOC, which are massive open online courses. There's a lot of free MOOCs available, and and I mean, not they won't be specifically school librarianship, but there'll be things like digital literacy. If you want to learn how to use digital tools to create posters and newsletters and things in your school library to promote your services, there's free training available on those. Do just have a search. It's amazing what's out there. It's yeah, quite interesting. There's a lot there. But as I say, if you are a SILIP member, you can sign up for SLG newsletter, because you can sign up for any, you can sign up to any SIGS Unite now in SILIP, as well as member networks. This is, if you've got a local member network, I don't know if they'll meet close to you, but I used to, well, I probably still belong to the Thames Valley. I used to work near where they met. I don't now. I'm working from home and it's a bit too far to travel for a meeting. But they used to organise in-person meetings with a whole range of different librarians, because the member networks involve lots of different types of sectors. So you'll get law librarians, prison librarians, health librarians, all mixed in. So the training they offer, the talks and the things they offer are relevant to all sectors rather than being specific to one. So yeah, it's quite interesting. So that might be another avenue to explore. There's a lot out there. There is a huge amount out there. In fact, there's almost too much. Once you start searching, you sort of get a little bit bogged down with it all, to be honest, and you can go down the rabbit hole a little bit. So be specific about what you're wanting to learn, what CPD you want, and if you see anything else that looks interesting, just bookmark it for coming back to you later. Right, is that all the questions?
Yes. Yeah.
Right, I think I've probably covered. Well, if anybody's got any other burning questions, I guess I think they can always send them in, can't they?
Yeah. Send them to
So
the chair
yeah,
address that I
and
put
we
in the
will
chat.
try. Yeah, but you can send them to SILIP as well. The what are they called? PRSOs, Professional Registration Support, that's it. PRSOs, Professional Registration Support Officers. And if you look on that aspect, on that bit of the website, which you should all be going on to and refreshing yourself with the criteria. I don't know how much exploration you've done on the professional registration group section on the SILIP website. If you don't know how to get into it, you click on my profile. The way I do it is you click on my profile once you've logged on at the top, and then on the left you'll see groups with a number next to it. If you click on the number, you will be in the professional registrations support group. Because that's everybody doing professional registration, and that is where you'll find the handbook with the criteria, and the link to the PKSB. But there's also lots of resources on there. There's lots of videos. Some of them are a little bit out of date, but they're still quite useful. But there's information on reflective writing, how to fill in the PKSB. There's lots of things. So, and there's all there tabs at the bottom. It's not very clear, so you need to explore the website and have a look at it. So, and then, as I say, you can email the PRSO with your questions and they'll answer them. But feel free to email us as well. We don't mind. Right, I think that's probably it.
Yeah, I think so.
Cool.
We will send out, like I said, we will send out the video and put it on our website, probably not next week, but the week after. And any of these questions, any links, we will send you those as well. Okay, so that everything will be available. And use if there's burning question, send it to me at the chair email and the one that sent you this link, and I will pass them on to Barbara.
Yeah. So
got a lot of thanks in the Barbara, in the questions
Cool.
here.
Right. Well, I hope it helped. Yeah. And as I say, yeah, we're happy to help and answer questions and things and get everybody through their chartership journey.